Hello, this is Chris Ferrara for Fatima Perspectives, the Fatima Center's continuing commentary on church affairs. In the last couple of segments, I talked about the Synod of October 2014. I discussed the novelty of the concept of a synod, the idea that prelates meeting in Rome would sit and debate matters of doctrine and long-established practice as if the church was some sort of democracy and the synod were a kind of parliament that it could pass legislation amending doctrine or practice. And I showed how that concept is fraught with potential for disastrous upheavals in the church. And that's what happened at Synod 2014, with, in particular, the midterm report, not even passed upon by the Synod Fathers, which suggested an opening to homosexuals, the valuing of the homosexual orientation, and a case-by-case permission for people who had divorced and remarried and were living in adulterous relationships to receive Holy Communion without altering the relationship, contrary to the 2,000-year-old discipline of the Church defended by John Paul II in Familiaris Consortio a mere 33 or 34 years ago. I talked about the role of Cardinal Burke in leading or participating in a rebellion against the manipulation of the Synod by those at the Synod who were pursuing an agenda according to the manifesto of the midterm report, that the Synod Fathers, once they found out about it, completely rejected. I told you that Cardinal Burke, after the Synod was removed from his position as head of the Apostolic Signatura, the Church's highest tribunal, in an insulting demotion, was placed in charge of the Knights of Malta in a purely ceremonial position. An unprecedented rebuke and demotion of a trusted, respected, and widely admired cardinal, a prince of the church, obviously in retaliation for his being too conservative for the current climate in the church, a climate that was fostered by this very idea of having synods to discuss settled matters and debate them, suggesting to the faithful that the church could change her doctrine or change her discipline in support of doctrine. Now, Cardinal Burke, since his demotion, has been quite courageous in continuing to defend the truth about marriage and the integrity of the doctrine of the church as protected by her bimillennial discipline. Because discipline, what the church requires Catholics to do in living out the faith, is designed to protect their belief in the doctrines of the faith. And this is why a Catholic who divorces or purports to divorce a spouse to whom he or she is validly married cannot take up with another man or woman, another husband or wife, and pretend that this is anything other than what our Lord called it, adultery. And for that reason, the Church has always forbidden the reception of Holy Communion by the divorced and so-called remarried Catholic. Cardinal Burke has been courageous in continuing to insist upon the intimate connection between the Church's perennial practice and her doctrine, in this case, her infallible teaching on the absolute indissolubility of a valid sacramental marriage in the Catholic Church. Now, after the Synod, something very curious happened. I noted in the previous segments that the Synod Fathers had rejected the midterm report with its outrageous suggestion that the Church accept and value the homosexual orientation and admit public adulterers to Holy Communion. The Church Fathers at the Synod had rejected this document, and yet Pope Francis ordered that the same document be circulated to the bishops in preparation for Synod 2015 in October of this year, as if the document had not been rejected totally by the Synod Fathers. Furthermore, there were 3 highly controversial paragraphs in the final Synod report, which undid a lot of the damage of the midterm report that the Synod Fathers had never voted on in the first place. But these 3 paragraphs seem to suggest a continuing opening to gays, so-called, as such, in the Church, and to the idea that the divorced and remarried could be readmitted to Holy Communion without changing the nature of their relationship. Well, Cardinal Burke has said, and I quote, in an interview given after his demotion, "One thing that disturbs me is the 3 very objectionable paragraphs which did not receive the required 2/3 approval by the Synod Fathers, but yet were included in the final printed text. One must go to the end of the document to see the notation, indicating that they were not approved. This, he said, has never happened before in a synod of bishops. If a proposition did not receive approval by 2/3 of the voting members, it simply did not become part of the final synodal document. End quote. As Cardinal Vincent Nichols exulted in the face of this development, he's quite happy about it. Pope Francis, said he, has, quote, torn up the rule book, end quote. What's the point of having a synod if the synod deliberations, the ones which actually occurred as opposed to the pseudo-interim report, are going to be disregarded? What's the point of a synod voting on a document paragraph by paragraph if the 3 paragraphs the synod failed to adopt are included in the document, as if they had accepted those 3 paragraphs? Here again, Cardinal Burke was quite courageous to protest this abuse of the synodal process. And the synod, as I pointed out in the other segments, is itself a problematical process, fraught with difficulties and even the potential for disaster, because it suggests to the faithful that matters such as this are up for a vote. And if you don't get what you want at Synod 2014, agitate, lobby, as if you were lobbying a legislature for a new vote at the next synod, the next parliament, the next Congress, which is given the appearance of running the church now in this age of synodality, as Pope Francis calls it. He wants more synodality in the church. Now, I pointed out that Bishop Athanasius Schneider said that for the first time in church history, a heterodox text, meaning the midterm report, was adopted by a synod under the guidance of a pope. It is this development that indicates the state of affairs in the church that alarms Cardinal Burke. Never before have we seen such a breakdown in doctrinal integrity at the highest levels in the church. Now, Our Lady of Fatima did not appear only at Fatima. She appeared in Akita, Japan, in a series of apparitions recognized as authentic by the local ordinary, Bishop Ito. And in one of these apparitions, specifically on October 13, 1973, Our Lady said this about a future crisis in the church, and I quote, "The work of the devil will infiltrate even into the church in such a way that one will see cardinals opposing cardinals, bishops against bishops." And she went on to say that there will be many in the church who will be attempted to accept compromises. And what she told us would come to pass in the church during the apparitions in 1973 is coming to pass at this very moment in history. We see in the synod itself cardinals opposing cardinals and bishops opposing bishops. And now we have to look to cardinals such as Cardinal Burke and the few like him who have the courage to stand up to what Sister Lucia of Fatima rightly called diabolical disorientation among the very leadership of the church. And this is why we speak of a crisis of truth in the Catholic Church, and this is why, in fact, the Fatima Center exists, to promote the only solution to this crisis, which is found in the message of Fatima itself, and will involve the ultimate consecration of Russia, the conversion of that poor nation, the triumph of the Immaculate Heart, and the end of the ecclesial crisis in which we are now living. For Fatima Perspectives, this is Chris Ferrara.